Gloria and Jennifer Williams for arranging this meeting. I'm Carl Kimmick. This is my partner, John Holt. And we had a little bit of a glitch. We're going to go through some good material tonight. We had found a great video on the internet which went through graphically water disposal wells and the EPA underground injection control program. Unfortunately, you need cell phone coverage. We needed to run it, which we don't have here. So we'll skip over that, and basically what I wanted to do, both of us wanted to do tonight, is give you a background on how we came to this point. John and I have done what our background is, the number of years we've been up in this area operating, how we decided to start the water disposal well project, the reason behind that, and what the timeline was. And then we wanted to go through, I've got a list of, I've fielded lots of phone calls over the last 2 years from different folks, and we've met with a fair number of people, and it seems like we get a lot of the same questions, the same issues, and some of which I think are misperceptions of what is involved and what we're planning to do. So we're going to try to clear that up tonight, and then we'll open it for questions. Obviously, we won't answer all of the questions, but I'm going to try to answer as many as I can because I know from prior experience what some of the questions are going to be. First of all, I wanted to go through the background of John and myself. John and I both graduated from Penn State in 1981 with degrees in petroleum and natural gas engineering and began pursuing our separate careers. I moved out west, he stayed back east here, and we got back together in the late 90s. I had started my own company by then. John had started his own company, a gas production company. What we do is we go out typically and buy existing oil and gas wells. These days, unfortunately, it's mostly natural gas wells. And we use our petroleum engineering skills to try to enhance the production. And we do exotic things like fix pipeline leaks and fix wellheads and change tubing and put new equipment on wells that work and come up with what we think are newer, better ways to enhance the production by perhaps removing some of the fluid from the wellbores. Every natural gas well produces some brine, some salt water with it. That's just the nature of what's in the earth. We've been, when we started our little joint venture, as I mentioned, John has his own company, I have my own company. We started a company back in the late 90s called Lion Energy, creatively named for our relationship to Penn State, obviously. And one of the first things we did is we bought a number of old wells from a company called Belden and Blake. Well, a number of those happen to be up in this area, Columbus Township and a few of the surrounding townships. They're all tied into the same gathering system, and it's approximately 80 natural gas wells, all drilled in the mid-80s to early 1990s by several different companies, Belden and Blake, U.S. Energy, Universal Resources, and we sell our gas to National Fuel into a tap over in Columbus Township. We compress the gas and we dry it and sell it. That's our business. Up until the last couple of years, it's been pretty decent because natural gas prices were higher. Obviously, if you've been following that, and if you're a royalty owner, you know that natural gas prices have come down dramatically in the last 4 or 5 years. That's due to a couple of things, primarily because of all of this Marcellus shale gas that's been produced in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia, and now because of also the Utica shale, which some people have heard of, that started over in Ohio and is now moving this way. We'll get into that a little bit later on. As everybody, I'll just mention this briefly. As everyone knows, up here the Marcellus is present, but it's very shallow and thin. When I say shallow, relatively speaking, it's maybe 2,500 to 3,000 feet deep, and it's maybe 15 to 20 feet thick. In comparison to where they're drilling it heavily and making these very nice natural gas wells, it's perhaps 6,000 to 8,000 feet deep and maybe 100 to 150 feet thick. So you can, and as obviously if it's thicker, it holds more gas. If it's deeper, it has more pressure. Therefore, the wells are more economic. Perhaps at some point in the future, those wells will be economic up here as gas prices perhaps come back from their current lows and the technology advances to the point where it's cheaper to complete those wells. But as of this point, it's not an attractive target, and that's why nobody's been up here leasing for the Marcellus. However, there have been folks up in this area leasing in anticipation of the Utica Shale moving into this area. That's been an interesting drilling play that's going on over in Ohio that has not only natural gas, but quite a bit of oil and what they call rich gas, which is high BTU, has a lot of propane, ethane, things like that, and demands a higher price. The latest thing I can tell you on that is Range Resources drilled a well this summer in southern Crawford County, which my inside source buddies over there at Range tell me looks pretty good. They had nice gas shows and they completed it, and now they're letting it sit. They've accidentally, one of the producers discovered that letting a well sit for about 2 months before they flow it back actually makes the well a better well. They had been, the common practice was to complete the hydraulic fracture stimulation. They put 15, 20 of these hydraulic fractures in a single horizontal wellbore, immediately turn it back and start to flow it back, recover some of the water, and turn the well into production. Now they're finding if they wait a couple of months, they have a much better well. So anyway, I think probably in the next month or two, Range will release some public information regarding that Utica well, and that's getting closer. I mean, it's coming to this area, and there's pretty substantial wells up in this area under Columbus Township. None of our wells go that deep. The deepest well we have is maybe 5,000 feet deep, but I think that's around 7,500 or 8,000 feet deep. Those would be some substantial wells for this area. So anyway, going back to my story, Lion Energy, we've been involved up here in Columbus Township for about 16 years, operating wells. Why did we decide to branch into water disposal? Back in 2010, state of Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, because of increasing concerns of water being treated and then going into the rivers. For years, what we have done with our produced salt water up in this area, we've got a couple of different outlets for it. Every well up here, either ours or anybody else, the producers in New York, producers in Pennsylvania, produces some level of salt water. Sometimes it's very little bit. You need to haul a 50-barrel tank once a year. Sometimes it's 4 times a year. And traditionally, that's been used by the townships for salt and dust control, or when they can't use it because of weather conditions, it's hauled to one of a number of treatment plants on the Allegheny River in this region, and it's treated to DEP standards, and then the clean water is then discharged. So when they changed the discharge requirements, or allowances, I should say, in 2010, we got a letter from the companies that we had been taking water to on the river. Excuse me. And the letter basically said, these are the new regulations. We're going to have to decrease the amount of water we take in from all producers. It just wasn't to us, it was to all producers. And they said, in the future, we're going to be limited on how much water we can take. We're not sure if we're going to be able to take your water at all. So John and I, sitting here, our business is producing these wells. That's a problem. What are we going to do with the water now from our wells? And so we started to look around our field. And John has experience in New York State operating disposal wells. I've got experience operating disposal wells and water injection wells in California, Texas, Colorado, and Oklahoma. And the thought occurred to us as we sat around the table talking that we probably have some wells in our field which would take the water as disposal wells. And we knew that back here in Pennsylvania, that program is regulated by the Environmental Protection Agency. So as we reviewed our options, we made the decision at that point to permit one of our own wells. of course, as it turns out, 2 of our own wells at this point. So then the question has been asked of me by folks, okay, well, how do we decide where the best place for a disposal well in the field? Now, I've heard people say, well, they just put it up there by Bear Lake because they don't care about Bear Lake. Well, that's not true. The reason it's put up here is the best place for a disposal well is in the best place for a production well. And some of the best natural gas production wells in this field are right up there over the hill on the old Bittinger farm, and then further west and then further south. So geologically, it made the most sense. A, they produced a lot of gas at a very rapid rate. That tells us it has a nice permeable formation. Permeability is the rate or the ability of rock to accept a fluid, whether it's gas or water flowing through it. And they were depleted. Okay, most of the gas had been produced, so now we had a great spot that we knew the wells would probably likely take water, and we also knew that the reservoir was depleted, so there wasn't any pressure that we were going to have to overcome. A great storage place for spent production water. So, as we sat there back in 2010 talking about this, we started to look at all the regulatory requirements and all the permits that we would be required to have. And then we started to think about, we're probably not the only guys in this situation. We're always looking for ways to enhance our revenue, and we thought, well, let's make this a commercial disposal well. And all that means is that gives us the ability to take brine from other operators, not simply our own. And yes, some of this brine will be Marcellus water. We're going to talk about that in a little bit because I know that's a concern as well. But now we go back to the steps that we were taking back in 2010 to get to this point. And oil and gas leaks, this is important to remember, oil and gas leaks, normal leaks, and I know some of you in here may be subject to a lease as a landowner, does not allow for the disposal of water. It allows for the production of oil or gas, and that's it. So the first thing we had to do is recognize, okay, this is the best place geologically to put water from an operations standpoint. So we had to approach the surface owner and the mineral owner to secure both a surface easement to lay water lines and also a mineral lease amendment, which would allow us to put water under ground back in the formation where the oil or the gas and water come out. So we approached, as a matter of fact, the first person we approached was Mr. Bittinger. I called him on the phone. He was living up in New York at the time, and he said, I don't want to mess with all that. Why don't you guys just buy the minerals? And I said, okay, what do you want for it? And so he made me an offer, and we negotiated. We bought the minerals. That solved our mineral lease amendment issue. And then the next step was we sat down with the adjacent landowner, spoke with him about what our plans were, showed him on a map, talked to him all about how the EPA administers an underground disposal project. He got comfortable with that, and we signed a surface easement with him. We tried to contact the landowners of the Bittinger farm. Apparently there were 2 families living up in Connecticut somewhere. As it turns out, as we were trying to contact them, the place went up for sale. We contacted them on the phone, and it was a price that made sense to us at the time. We thought, okay, this might be a good base of our little operation up there. We just store a little equipment and set some pipe up there. So we bought that land. So in any event, so now we've got the easements in place that would allow us to proceed with pursuing all the regulatory permitting. The first thing you have to do in a situation like that is prepare the EPA regulates all disposal wells and injection wells in Pennsylvania, New York, some other states, because this state decided years ago they weren't going to have what's called primacy and regulate that at a state level. So it then becomes the federal government's responsibility. And we had a engineering consulting firm which has 10,000 employees that prepare these all over the country, prepare a brine disposal well permit application, one for each well. And as you can see, it's a nice thick document that goes through a plethora of information regarding casing programs, offset wells, water wells in the area, what the completion, the original completion looked like, what the pressure looks like originally in the well. What, the entire program of the EPA is designed to protect the underwater or underground sources of drinking water. In this area, the deepest wells are maybe 200, 250 feet deep. And so there's lots of regulations regarding surface casing, production casing, and well construction that go into an application. That was submitted back in October of 2010, 2 years ago, this month. Interesting. The next step in this process was the notice. Once the EPA reviews this permit and they're comfortable with it, they post the permit in the paper, and they post the application, not the permit, but the application in the paper. And if there's enough interest generated, they hold a public meeting. The EPA holds the public meeting, and they answer questions and take comments. Well, many of you were at that meeting. It was in March of 2011, and frankly, I think we were caught off guard with some of the questions and issues that were raised. And I think they were legitimate concerns, but I think there were some misperceptions and misconceptions about the way the program was run, it is run by the EPA, and also the history of the program, and also some of what our intent was. So subsequent to that meeting, we left that meeting and we reached out to several individuals. We subsequently went over to Warren, had a meeting with the county commissioners, had a meeting with Representative Broughton and some of her staff. We had at that meeting, there were some town officials from Columbus, Bear Lake, and also a few local residents. And John and I, I think we answered many questions that day, and I don't know that they were all completely satisfied. Some of this stuff is not easy to understand. Granted, I understand it. I've been doing it for 30 years, but we stayed there as long as we had to and answered many questions. And subsequent to that, I've had a number of meetings with some individuals and phone conversations, again, in an attempt to answer questions that come up regarding some of the project moving forward. After that, subsequent to all of those meetings, the EPA UIC permits were finalized, and we received them on, June 8th, 2011. So it was roughly 5-6 months after we submitted the application. At this point in time, after we received the permit from the EPA, after they take into account the public comments, it's at that point that we can proceed with working with the DEP and all the other permits that are required to implement a project like this. The DEP doesn't want to talk to you until you have the EPA permit. The EPA regulates everything underground. DEP regulates everything on the surface, surface disturbance and physical activity on the surface. 30 days after we received the permit, what is called a petition for review was filed by 2 local residents. And let me clarify what this petition for review is of the permit application. It is not an appeal. It is not a method where somebody can come in and say, oh no, we just don't think this permit is valid, you can't have it. What it is a way for any interested party to come forth and say, EPA, we think you missed 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 or 6 or 8, whatever, points, issues when you reviewed this permit for the application, and we think you need to do a review. The result of a petition for review can be an amendment to the permit, whereby they may come back, for example, and say, okay, instead of 1,700 psi maximum injection pressure, yeah, we think it's showing 1,500. Or, perhaps we need to review a different size area than you did. That's fine. And so the process after this petition for review is filed, and this has been a problem with the DEP. When they have a permit in their hands, they have a clock, 60 days. And if you hand them a permit application and they have a question on it, and this is the great thing about the DEP, they do a great job. they guarantee that they will come back to you in 60 days with your permit. If they have a question, they send it back, the clock stops, you take time, you answer the question, you send it back, the clock restarts. So you know in 60 days, total time, you're going to have a result. You'll have the permit, and it will be complete, what they call administratively complete. With the EPA, once this petition for review is filed, it goes down to Washington, D.C. and goes on the docket in the Environmental Review Board down there. The Environmental Review Board looks at petitions for review from all of the EPA programs, whether it's clean air, clean water, UIC program, for all over the United States. They're looking at things like refineries in California, coal plants, offshore platforms, and our 2 wells. And they don't have a clock. I called down there and I said, well, can we estimate when this will be heard? They said, well, usually in chronological order, but we could, put another case or 2 or 5 or 10 ahead of yours at our discretion. It's for administrative law judges. So we continue to proceed with the DEP, working on their permits, and finally, in July 8th, 2011, in June of this year, 2012, I apologize, let me back up just a second. With the petition for review, when that is submitted, that is actually submitted to the regional office in Philadelphia. They prepare the response. They send that down to Washington, D.C. The regional office takes a look at the comments, and they take a look at the work they did, and they make a recommendation to D.C. Region 3 recommended rejecting the petition. Basically, they were saying, you know what, this permit is fine as it stands with all the conditions. So then it goes down to Washington, D.C., and they review it. So that took a year. We fast forward to June of this year, and that came back. The interesting thing was the Environmental Review Board down there rejected the petition on 5 of the 6 issues, and it was remanded back to the regional office in Philadelphia on 1 issue. And interestingly, that issue was not a technical issue, but an administrative issue. They didn't feel that the regional office didn't do a good enough job explaining what's called the area of review. The area of review in this case has turned out to be a quarter of a mile, but there was some confusion in the fact that although the area of review was a quarter mile, we went out and surveyed all the wells eventually within a mile, water wells, and did tests on those. And that was explained in the Region 3 response out of Philadelphia. But looking back on it, and they called me and they apologized, they didn't do a very good job of it. So what they did at that point was went back out with another more clear explanation of that specific point, outlining that the area of review is a quarter mile around these wells. If anyone is aware of any residential water wells within that quarter mile, which there are not, we've done inspections, and that was not an issue. It was the explanation that was the issue. He said if anybody's aware of a water well, report it to us. So that starts a 60-day clock from that point. We're nearing the end of that 60-day clock. That's going to be in early November, and we expect to finally have that permit in place. That is the long drawn-out story about how we decided to locate the water wells and how we have progressed through the permitting process. This is to orient you, this is the corner of State Road, Cornish Hill Road, and here's State Line Road. This is New York, this is Pennsylvania. To give you an idea of what the current project is designed to do, these are the 2 water disposal wells that will dispose into the depleted zone. This is the pipeline. It's a dual pipeline. It's a pipeline inside of a pipeline that is designed, if there's ever a leak in the inner pipeline, every drop of water will be captured and it'll go into a tank down here. There won't be any tanks over here. This is where the truck onload and offload facility will be. Before I move on to some more discussion specific on this, As I had mentioned, we had the video, which we couldn't show, but I did bring some handouts, one of which I think is the most useful that I've found regarding disposal wells. This is on the Groundwater Protection Council website. It's about a 15-page white paper. The title is Injection Wells, an Introduction to Their Use, Operation, and Regulation. And it's got some diagrams in it. It has a detailed explanation of the beginnings of the EPA UIC program back in the early 1970s. And in here they describe there's over 170,000 of this type of well, injection or disposal well, class 2 in the United States. They describe all of the different classes, 1, 2, 3, 4, excuse me, 5. Interesting note I wanted to make on this particular item. Someone told me that up by our property there's a sign across the road that has a note on it that says hammer mill well, check, failed. Cross well, check, failed. Well, let me tell you what the real story is on those two wells. The hammer mill well is mentioned here. That is the well that started this entire program. That was before these regulations were even in place. It was a well that was used by International Paper over in Erie. Some of you may be more familiar with it with me. It's my understanding it was a shallow injection well built by some paper guys. They weren't engineers, they weren't geologists, they certainly weren't regulated. And they were injecting mule pickerel. And at some point it broke out under Lake Erie, and that was the end of that. And at that point, somebody said, hey, we really need to take a closer look at this underground injection and start to regulate it and make sure this is done in a responsible way. That was the beginning of this program. This will be a great resource for you to learn what's involved with this type of a project. The cross well, it's my understanding, I know that well's been in operation since the mid-'80s, and it had a casing leak. And it's my understanding that that worked the way the program's supposed to work. You have an automatic shutoff on your casing tubing annulus, which we'll show you in a minute, at the wellhead. As soon as a leak is detected, the pressure drops and it automatically shuts in. So you have a little or no leak. And that well developed a casing leak that's been in use for maybe 30 years or longer. And they decided at that point that it served its useful life. It was costly, going to be costly to repair it. And they had other options, and that's why they decided to plug and abandon the well. Now, let's go to the next slide, John. Should we jump to the slide that just shows the water disposal well? Since we don't have the video, and I know this is tough to see back there, but this program is very specific as to what needs to be done to a well in order for it to be allowed to take water. It has to, first of all, it has to have surface pipe that is cemented all the way back to surface that's at least 100 feet deeper than the deepest freshwater zones in the area. Our two wells are 400 or 500 feet with surface worth of surface pipe, so we're plenty deep to cover all of the freshwater zones and then some. Then it also has to have a certain amount of cement over the zone of injection or disposal down here in your inner casing string. We've got probably 1,000 feet to 2,000 feet over the zone of disposal. And third string of pipe, you have this injection tubing with a packer located just above the zone of disposal. And that's filled with a non-corrosive fluid. And that is monitored as well. So if you see any change in that pressure, you know you've got a failure in your packer. Doesn't mean you polluted anything. It just means that this packer is no longer working. You have 2 strings instead of 3 strings. So you shut down, you go in and you repair that before you can. And then you have to you conduct what's called a mechanical integrity test. Build pressure on that. Hold it for a certain period of time. That has to be witnessed by an EPA representative and recorded and become part of the permanent record. That's been done on both of these wells. Both of these wells, we went in, because they are older wells, we cut the casing at this point right at the top of the cement on the 4.5, the inner string. We pulled all that pipe out. We ran brand new pipe back in and set an adapter and tested that. And now we've got brand new pipe all the way back to surface. Okay, let's go back to the, keep going back, misconceptions. These are questions that I guess, or issues that have come up. And, you know, as I've thought about these and talked to folks, you know, I realize that some of these things I think are a little difficult to understand because we're dealing with something that's 4,000 or 5,000 feet underground, and it's not always easy to visualize. The first one, and I think this is a major misconception, is brine traveling miles underground. Well, the EPA and also the calculation of the area of review. Underground, sometimes I've run into some folks that think that oil, gas, these layers underground that hold the fluids are a vast open pool or a cavern. They're not. They're a layer of rock. And the layer of rock's been there for 300–400 million years. And if you look at it up close, with the naked eye, it looks like a chunk of rock. But if you look at it under a microscope, it's just a bunch of little sand grains, like a sandstone, and that's the particular zone we have, like this. Well, where does the oil and gas and water exist? It exists in these little spaces right here. They're called pores. And that's why it comes out so slowly. That's why it comes out over 20 or 30 or 40 years. It's also what the water has to travel into when it's being reinjected under the ground. Anytime a well is produced, the well will flow gas and water from a certain radius around that well into the wellbore, and then it's produced up. Typically up in this area, it may be 40, 50 acres is what a well will ultimately drain over many years. That's where the water is going to go back into. It'll go back into that void space that each particular well has drained, and it won't go any further than that. Once that water penetrates and fills up that void space, that depleted space, it returns to the original reservoir pressure. That's our permit pressure. We get to that pressure, we shut down, we plug and abandon the well, the water stays there just where it was for 400 million years. It's not coming back. And it doesn't, you know, if that were not true, and you had wells that could drain miles and miles or hundreds or thousands of acres, you'd have only needed 1 or 2 wells in this entire township. Well, we know that's not true. There's hundreds of wells, 150 wells. The next thing I want to talk about is this area of review. The EPA has a formula that they use. It's a scientific formula used by geologists and engineers to calculate this area of review. And what that is designed to do is that this is your well, and this is this depleted sand zone that we're injecting water into. What they calculate based on the permitted injection rate. Ours is 1,000 barrels a day. The one about 30,000 barrels a month over the expected life of the well, which is 10 years. They say, at what point will that well, assuming no layers of rock above it, which makes it even more conservative because we've got all these layers of rock holding that water down. These are impermeable. The water's not going to go that way, it's going to go that way, unless this rock is fractured. We know what pressure the rock fractures at, we stay below that. So this area of review is designed to calculate over a 10-year period, how high is this water going to come up and at what distance from the wellbore. If it doesn't come up to a quarter mile, which this did not, they tell you you have a minimum of a quarter mile of your area of review. So that's the least amount that you're going to have to go out. What you do with the area of review is you have to identify all of the other wellbores, either old wellbores or existing wellbores, and you have to show the EPA that they also have the same surface casing that protects the freshwater zone as your well that you're going to inject into. In addition to that, you have to identify all the freshwater wells that are up here that might be within that quarter mile area of review. For our 2 wells, we don't have any water wells within the quarter-mile air review. You're supposed to, under the regulatory requirements, we have to test these for a minimum of, I think it's 16 different constituents that could be contained in salt water, and or I should say production brine, gas well production brine. What we did, A, obviously to protect ourselves, and B, just as a service to some of the locals up there, we went out a mile and tested all of the water wells. And I think that's where some of the confusion came in on this petition. I think that some folks thought that was a regulatory requirement. It wasn't. We had to identify all the water wells within a mile, but not test them. And I'll tell you this, the interesting thing we found, and if I could give you any advice, if you have a water well, have it tested, and have it tested regularly. I think we tested a little over 20 wells up there, and the EPA has drinking water standards of about 15, 16, 18 different constituents in water. And I can tell you there's not one well up there that passed every one of those constituents. We didn't put a drop of water in the ground yet. Okay, and I bet you half of those wells had bacteria problem. And you know, it comes from surface runoff if they're close to a pasture, close to a field that's being fertilized, close to a septic system. This is not uncommon. I will tell you this, don't feel bad because that's not uncommon for Pennsylvania. I've seen studies, all of the Marcellus wells, any new wells drilled in Pennsylvania has to have the water wells, fresh water wells tested around it pre-drilling. And that's pretty much right in line with what they're finding across Pennsylvania. About half the water wells already polluted. So my advice is, you know, have your water well tested, and beyond that, I'm not sure what to advise you, but just be aware that just because it's a fresh water residential well doesn't mean it's pristine or spring water. The next point, old unknown wells penetrating the zone of disposal. You know, that's a legitimate concern. And many parts of this county, and fortunately for us, it was in the southern part of the county, there has been historic oil drilling. If you're a landowner and you're a royalty owner, you probably wish you had some oil production on your property now, but we don't, for the most part, up in this region. And as far as we can tell, there wasn't an old history of oil well drilling up here. But the big issue is not so much shallow oil wells that may be unknown. The big issue is wells that penetrate the zone of disposal. And the reason for that is, obviously, you know, whether it's quarter mile or half mile, if you're going into this a little later, and you've got another well over here that you don't know about, well, there is some potential that it may come up there, especially if it's very close. You know, if it was drilled 100 feet away. We did a search of all the old records. We weren't able to find anything. We've spoken with some folks in the area. Nobody remembers any drilling prior to 50 years ago. But even more important than that, and I have the point up there about pressure, if there were old wells that had penetrated this zone, the wells that were drilled in the 80s and 90s would be depleted. They weren't. They all discovered original reservoir pressure, which tells us that there weren't any old wells that penetrated that zone. Otherwise, there would be no gas. The next point, water composition. I know that's a big issue, and it's an issue because of the perception of this Marcellus water is a lot different than normal produced water that is spread on the roads and taken over to the disposal plant. And it is. It is quite a bit different. It's not toxic, it's not hazardous. You know, we wouldn't drink it, but it's not considered hazardous waste. I can tell you that under the regulatory requirements of both the EPA and the DEP, we have to measure and analyze all the water that comes into this well. And a record has to be kept of that, and a record is made public. It's on the EPA website. At this point in time, I do have some handouts which talk about what's in a typical hydraulic fracture, as far as additives and chemicals. As you'll see when you read through here, a lot of these are household chemicals that you use every day and flush down the sink. Obviously not in the same volumes, I get that. But we're not talking about flushing them down the sink. We're talking about putting them 4,000 or 5,000 feet underground under highly regulated and monitored conditions where they'll never come back. I have a couple of folks had asked me, they're associated with emergency management, both Bear Lake and Columbus. Okay, can we see what's in this if there's any sort of a spill? I do have some copies of some production brine analysis, which I think the townships have anyway, and also some what is considered standard Marcellus production analysis. You can look at that, and I just brought a few copies of that. But we also, and I'll get to this in a minute, we're required with the DEP to create what's called a pollution prevention and control plan. It's not just us, everybody is involved with any kind of industrial activity. And a copy of that is always kept up at the site, and a copy will be given to the emergency personnel, fire departments of the two communities here. There won't be anything flammable, there won't be anything considered hazardous in this water. Our system is designed up there to, first of all, with trucks unloading, unload on a concrete pad which is over a pit which is lined with 30 mil liner according to DEP standards. So even the smallest drop of water that would be spilled when a truck is unloading would be captured. The pipeline, as I mentioned, is a dual pipeline inside another pipeline. So if there's ever a leak on the internal pipeline, we discover the leak that goes back into the tank, no water spilled on the ground. And I've shown you how the wells are constructed, all according to DEP and EPA regulations. Next question. Big issue. I get a lot of questions on earthquakes. Why? Because we had an earthquake over in Ohio. There was a seismic event on a disposal well in Youngstown, I think it was last year. Let me tell you the difference between, and it's a big difference, two big differences between our operation and that over there. A lot of their disposal wells in Ohio, which they've got several hundred, inject into a formation called Mount Simon Sandstone. It's not normally a sandstone or a formation that produces gas or oil. It's naturally fractured, and they know from years ago in trying that it takes water. So they figure it's a great water disposal zone. The problem occurs because, so first of all, my first point is it's not depleted. It's just the zone is fractured, it's under pressure, and they have to pump up the pressure and squeeze those fractures up a little bit more and pump water into it. The other issue is it lays, if this is the Mount Simon Sandstone, here's your injection well, it lays directly on top of what's called the basement. The basement is granite. That's where faults originate, okay, right there. And not only does it lay directly on top of this, so if you're injecting water into this and there's a fault in the area, well, you know, there's a chance that it may go over and hit that fault. So that's apparently what happened. And it wasn't a large earthquake, but it was an earthquake, and you know, nobody likes those. What happened was it came down in here. Earthquake was simply two plates of rock slipping that have built up friction, so you lubricate it up with water, and it slips. Our wells, first of all, are going into a depleted zone. We have a known empty reservoir that has been depleted of gas, billions of cubic feet of gas, and God knows how much water over the years. And we have a well that already penetrates it, where we're able to take measurements, and we know within a reasonable volume how much water that zone is going to be able to accept until it fills up, and then we plug the well. In addition to that, this basement that I mentioned is right below this zone over in Ohio where they have injected. It's 5,000 feet below this zone. So we're about a mile distant. There's no way this is going to have any impact at all on the basement. In addition to that, there's a 200-foot thick layer of salt above our zone of injection. That doesn't exist everywhere in Pennsylvania, but it exists all across this region up here in the UK.
Three layers of
But I'm
salt.
talking about the big thick ones.
Go on.
One's good enough, but if there's three, that's better. Okay, next issue I've heard, property devaluation. Based on everything I've just mentioned in regards to where this water can travel and what our operation will entail, I think, and by that I mean that water is not going to travel that far that it's going to go under somebody else's property. And we certainly know that it's not going to, I've shown you a number of cases where it certainly will not affect the fresh water. And so any claims of property devaluation is a matter of perception, okay? And I spoke to at least one person who said, you know, my dad's been trying to get X amount for this property and they can't get it now. And I said, well, are you selling it with the mineral rights or without the mineral rights? And he said, well, without the mineral rights. So I guess the point I'm trying to make, to be honest, is if you're selling your property without the mineral rights, you're giving somebody else the right to come in and do some permanent or temporary disruption of the surface, maybe 5 acres or so, while wells are drilled, and then move back out and leave a road and a little pad there with wells. Well, quite often the property owner, they get no compensation for that if they don't own minerals other than surface damage. That's not an attractive prospect when you're trying to sell your property. And I would suggest that if you have a claim of you're trying to sell your property and you think you're having difficulty doing this because the person that you're talking to has a misconception about what the particular risk may be of having that operation up there over the hill, and it's improper perception. I'd be happy to talk to anybody that's in that position and go through the same explanation. The last point here, road usage and hours of operation. I've had people say to me, we're going to have lights up there like a refinery and it's going to be 24/7, trucks in and out all day long. Ever since day one, we've said the same thing. And that is, what we want to do is initially test the injectivity on these wells longer term. And by doing that, we'll have at most 8 to 10 trucks per day during daylight hours, not at night, 6 days a week. No operations on Sunday. And when we get comfortable with the operation of those wells and how much water they'll be able to take, then our plan was to build a pipeline, build a facility somewhere down on Route 6, which hundreds of trucks carrying gasoline, propane, everything else travel up and down every day, and bring trucks over by that route so there would be no impact at all up in this area with trucks on the roads, and pipe that water up under the same thing, a low pressure dual pipeline that is monitored 24/7, and thereby eliminating any concerns with truck traffic or road wear. In the meantime, as I said, it's going to be limited. We don't own trucks. The companies we're talking to haul water in are bonded, just like anything else. If a road is damaged, they fix it. It's their responsibility. In many areas that have Marcellus water, the Marcellus drilling, and there has been road damage, it's always the same story. At the end of the work period, the roads are fixed, and from what I understand, quite often they're fixed far beyond what their original condition was. And quite often, some of the roads were fixed in the Marcellus drilling when they had a firm plan as to how many trucks were going to be coming in before the work was done. We're not going to use any, that's the other thing I heard, well, they bring these trucks right through the middle of Bear Lake. No, we're not. The current plan is to use state roads, not to use any dirt roads, and to be aware of that wear and tear, and be aware of that situation. And as I said, if a road's damaged, it'll be repaired. Next slide. Okay, I'm not going to spend a lot of time grinding you through this, but I just wanted to make everybody aware, because I have heard and I've seen some things in print that talk about, well, this isn't very regulated. And, you know, I don't know what these guys are doing. I don't know who's watching over them. This is a list of the permits that we've had to secure to do this project. Read them very quickly. I talked about the US EPA Underground Injection Control, DEP. They do require one permit for underground work. That is to convert a well from a producing well, which these are currently classified over to an injection well. They give that to you after this is finalized. You need to have a permit to do any surface disruption up there. So we had to get an ENS plan construction permit. This is interesting, something else most people aren't aware of. If you have any sort of a wetland on your property, or even if you have soil, it's called hydric soil, that will support a wetland, you need to have a permit if you're going to do any digging in it. And that doesn't matter if you're doing a pipeline through it, having a temporary disturbance, or if you're putting a barn out there. It's on private land. You may have heard, maybe not, out in Utah, some guy was building a little shed on his property and had 1 acre. One of his neighbors that didn't like him called the local authorities. Next thing you know, he was being fined and threatened with jail time because he did not have a permit to get in his wetland. They made him tear the house down, by the way. That's still going on. This pollution prevention control program, that's standard. That just what that does is it lists all of the emergency numbers that if there was ever any occurrence up there, as I said, there's nothing that's going. Typically this is more important if it's there's something that would be stored on site, like there's a gasoline storage facility or propane store, when they've got something that's explosive or flammable. There won't be anything explosive or flammable up there. We'll have all electric pumps, so it'll be quiet. And when it is in operation, and you know, we'll have basically salt water, and yes, there will be some chemicals in it. And you know, as I said, I've got some handouts that you can look at in regards to that. We had to have a highway occupancy permit for the entrance. They made us pave it because of potential dust. Highway excess maintenance agreement for the little portion of the road we'll use up there. Stormwater, zoning permit from the county. And then finally, when the well is, when the useful life of the well is over, you plug and abandon it. And both the state and the EPA require us to post a bond in the amount of full plugging liability. And we review that every couple of years. If it's not high enough, we put more money into the CD for the bond. So if we're no longer in existence when that well's reached its end of its useful life, there's money there to plug it. Is that everything on that slide? Is that all? Okay. You know, this is my final slide. I apologize, and I'll open it up for questions. We rarely talk about the positive impacts because everybody's always focused on the negative and everything. That just seems to be the way it is in the United States right now. I don't know. But you know, as I read and reflect on this, what's going on in Pennsylvania, and I realize it hasn't impacted this area that much yet. I think with the Utica, it will. But it may be a year or two. But underground disposal of water is considered best management practice by both the DEP and the EPA. Far better to put it back underground where it came from and where the gas was for 400 million years than to spread it somewhere or to treat it and discharge it. And so this is something that leads to, as gas prices come down, it allows producers, not only Marcellus producers, but also local producers to extend the life of their wells and continue operating the wells because it presents a less expensive method of operation to get rid of the water. You know, who knows, maybe in New York they'll get back to drilling someday. You know, I've heard some comments as well. I'm thinking about this gas and the huge volumes of gas being produced in the United States. And at the large level, you know, for all Pennsylvanians or everybody in this region actually, you know, I think about coals. I just read in the paper not too long ago that, first of all, that greenhouse gas emissions are down like 20% over the last 5 or 6 years. Well, that's a direct result of us burning a lot more natural gas than coal. In our electric generation for coal, and I apologize if there's any coal guys in here, I think we need both, but it's not as clean as natural gas right now. But the coal use for electric generation has dropped significantly. I think it was in the high 40s, maybe 50%. Now it's down in the low 40s nationwide. And more particular for this area, you know, I've read things in the paper that say, well, the Broken Straw watershed, what are we going to do about the Broken Straw? This is a threat to the Broken Straw watershed. I've just got done describing all the protections we're going to have for our operation to make sure that not a drop of water ever contacts anything in the Broken Straw watershed. And I just read earlier this year that First Energy, I don't know if anyone's heard of First Energy, they're a huge electric generation company over in Ohio, and they just announced earlier this year that they're closing, I believe, 5 or 6 coal-fired power plants. And obviously, publicly they're stating, wow, this is due to increased EPA regulations. And that's true, that's a large part of it. But I would suggest that privately, you know, they're not just going to shut off the electric to millions of people. Those plants are going to be replaced, which we know, by natural gas burning plants. And as I'm looking at that, I looked on the map. Where are those plants? At least 4 of those plants are directly west of Warren County, along the lake, Ashtabula, some other places. Well, we all know the prevailing wind in this part of the country is west to east. I would suggest that there's not a thing anybody in this room could do that is going to improve the Broken Straw watershed more than getting rid of millions and millions of tons of sulfur dioxide and mercury that have been coming out of there's some of the oldest plants in the country, by the way, that don't have the clean coal technology. So I think just in the 30,000-foot view of natural gas being beneficial, particularly for this area, that's one thing that maybe hasn't crossed a lot of folks' mind. The next thing is the shale impact fee. Well, you know, if you read the paper, I don't know if it was in the paper up here, but down in Pittsburgh, the first year they implemented this, they collected over $200 million. Now, granted, I understand that most of that goes to the local communities in which shale development has taken place, but they've earmarked, I believe it's over $70 million that goes back to every county for parks, recreation, sewer, and water. And that is not going to diminish. That's going to continue to grow because it's not a production or revenue-based fee. It's based on a number of wells, and it continues year after year. The next thing that I would call a positive impact, the local natural gas wells. You know, we haven't talked a lot about taking water from some of the local producers, both in New York and Pennsylvania, but I can tell you that there's a lot of wells shut in right now because folks can't get rid of the water because it's not easy to spread right now. A, and B, it's impossible, and natural gas prices are down. And who would benefit from that? Not only the producers, but lots of folks that own royalties. You know, granted, our checks haven't been that large that we've been sending out because of the gas price, and these wells are getting older. But you know, I bet we send out royalty checks to 300 different people, and at least. And they appreciate that. You know, I mean, it may be just, you know, $100 or a couple $100 a year, but it's better than zero. You know, the potential employment, this has come up before. I can't put a number on that. I mean, I don't know. It depends, you know, how these wells react. I do know that some of the trucking companies that have talked about bringing some water to us on a limited basis say they will hire some folks here in Warren County. I will tell you this, that back when we had our first meeting, one of the local reporters was kind enough, when we decided we needed to answer some questions, we put an email address in the paper, I believe it was in the Quarter Journal, inviting people to write questions. Our thought was, okay, if we can get some sort of little blog going, anybody that has access to the internet, we can answer questions and disseminate some information. I checked that about every other day for about 6 weeks, and I got one response, and it wasn't a question, it was a guy looking for a job. And I kept that, and I guarantee the first guy we have to hire, I'm calling him back. I don't know if he has a job yet or not, but You know, that just shows me that there, you know, we could have an impact in that manner. And finally here, potential contributions to town general funds, volunteer fire departments, community projects, anywhere John and I have operated. Now granted, we're small-time operators, we only have 80 wells, and we've had a number of wells up in New York. So any place we've operated, we've always tried to use local employees, local stores when we buy equipment, if they're available, pipe, any services, gravel, road grading. And we've always, you know, when we've been asked, the volunteer fire departments, I don't think Bear Lake has written this letter, but all fire departments solicit funds from area businesses. We're no different. You know, if you're having a short year and we're having a good year up there, somebody pick up the phone and call us. I mean, we make contributions and donations, and we're part of the community, and that's to be expected. And we've done that in the past. So that's what I'll leave you with. That's the end of my comments. At this point, I guess we'll open it up for questions. Hopefully, John can move your hand up first. Oh, I'm sorry. Could I just ask you, when you stand up to ask a question, if you could just state your name for our information, and also the community that you come from?
Jeffrey Young, Corey, Pennsylvania. I have about 3 questions for you. Water consumption per well fracking. How much is used to frack a well?
John's the expert on it. Why don't you talk about this?
The entire? Look, hydraulic fracturing since probably the late 70s, when the industry started what was called massive hydraulic fracturing. We went to a process that utilized between 300 and 500,000 gallons per stage.
Why am I reading anywhere from 4 to 6 million gallons?
It all depends
To
on the
frack a
number of
well.
stages. It all depends on the number of stages.
Okay.
What happened, let me finish the explanation and then maybe then you can have it. What happens is, like Carl said, as you drill the lateral in a well, depending on the length of that lateral, you'll probably put in 1 stage per every 250 feet. So if you get, say,
Now that we've
10
changed the
stages,
fracturing, let me just draw a quick. This is a horizontal well. This is the layer of rock. And I'm going to show you why horizontal drilling has transformed the industry. You probably know all this, but just for those that don't know. A normal vertical well comes down here, and they conduct a hydraulic fracture. Okay, so you get a fracture that looks like that, 2 straight up and down wings that stick out from the wellbore. That allows the gas to flow back in. What they've been able to do with the new technology is come into a layer of rock, say this is 100 feet thick, and maybe drill this 5,000 feet out of here. And then they come back and they start putting these fractures in like this. They know which direction the fractures are going to go. They drill perpendicular to the frac direction, and they come back and they put in multiple fractures. John said it could be 12, could be 15, could be 18, could be 30. And that's where you get the 4 million gallons.
Okay, my understanding is 4 to 6 million gallons of water to frack each well. If you've got a pad that's got 12 or 16 wells on it, then you compound that.
Right.
Okay? 80% of the water, from my understanding, from my reading, is left in the hole.
Right.
My second question. What is the cost difference of fracking with gel propane versus using water?
That's a great question. And I don't have the answer to that, but we did look at it. Because if they can, well, first of all,
You don't have the answer. You are controlling the natural gas engineer from Penn State University.
well, he asked me
You
the
don't have
cost.
the answer to that.
He asked me the cost of it. It's astronomically high, I can tell you that. But I think that we looked at this.
propane's
Maybe,
$1 cents a gallon.
so 4 million gallons. So,
So your cost
and
is
that,
just.
but I guarantee, no, that's what it costs to buy it. The reason I'm telling you I don't know is because I can pick. I know a guy that
You
is
should be
called.
very adept at knowing what this is because they're using it in Canada now.
They are. And
They are. I mean,
I've
the
talked
only
to
difference
gas
would be the
I know.
cost, would be the cost
Well,
range
well,
of the Canadian dollar versus US.
Let me back up, because Carl, one thing that we're missing in this discussion, and I don't mind talking about hydraulic fracturing or anything else. The one thing you're missing in this discussion, there's a tremendous amount of development and technology that goes into designing the fracture treatment. along with the chemicals and the components. A lot of what goes into the reservoir, depending on the age of the rock, what was originally in the rock, whether the rock contained oil, the total organic content of the rock, dictates what you want to bust it up with, okay? The fracturing parameters, okay, where you utilize propane versus utilizing water versus utilizing nitrogen versus utilizing foam versus utilizing just acid, it's all in the design parameters. In a lot of cases, in Pennsylvania, New York, propane has been tried in Pennsylvania. The resultant hydraulic fractures created, okay, because of the limitations on pressure, because of the other limitations you have utilizing propane, don't give you the results needed to create the reservoir you want. So if your question is, are there other things we're looking at? The answer to that is absolutely yes. Is the question, can we replace water currently used in Pennsylvania with propane? The answer is no, not at this time.
Because it's not cost effective.
No, it's not cost. It is not cost. There are other things that go into it. Okay, you got to remember, treating these wells at 9,000 or 10,000 psi with propane is a lot different than treating these wells at 9,000 or 10,000 psi with water. Okay, there's stipulations and requirements to go far beyond what you and I think about when we're just comparing two base fluids, and that's what you have to consider. It's not one. It's not a factor of the cost of one, the cost of the other. It's also the performance of the base fluid, the results you get after the treatment, and the basic reservoir parameters and what you actually accomplish with the treatment.
Yeah, in gel fracking, when you use gel frac, everything stays in the hole. All the nasty stuff. Let me finish. Everything's supposed to stay in the hole. Therefore, you have no need for injection wells because you take the water out of the issue. My daughter is a chemical engineer. She went to work for a company called BDM International after she graduated from Penn State. They were an environmental consulting firm for the Department of Energy. She was checking injection wells. I asked her point blank, I says, what do you think it is? She says, don't put anything in the ground unless it's clean to begin with, because it will come back to haunt you.
All I'm asking, is there a question in that?
I gave you some questions. You answered the questions. You told me it wasn't feasible. You don't know what the cost is. I don't honestly think you've looked into it. But the whole thing, the point of the water is, if you take the water out of the issue, we don't have injection wells. That shuts you down.
Wait, sir, sit down for a second.
That shuts you down because then you have no business.
What my partner just explained to you is the operation of the disposal facility. Okay, we're not hydraulically fracturing. If you want to change the discussion of drilling and development of wells, we can change that. But we came here to talk about what we've developed to solve an issue that's in Pennsylvania in this country today. This is state-of-the-art disposal methodology. Whether your daughter may have some reasons, I'd gladly talk to her. Look, what we're talking about is an operation that's extremely regulated. It's basically the preferred methodology for disposal of waste. If you look at what's going on in this country, it's not just this. I brought a list in. Do you know there's a classification of wells in Pennsylvania, Karen, that the EPA monitors called Class 5 injection, okay? Class 5 injection wells are wells that typically are either injected into or above the groundwater. You know how many of those there are in Pennsylvania?
Too many. None.
How many?
None.
Take a guess. According to a 2010 UIC well inventory in the state of Pennsylvania, there's 14,353 of these. Okay? We just explained to you the development of a program so that we can put this stuff back where it came from.
But you're taking a water table to do it. You're wasting our potable water.
Let me ask you another question. Do you happen to know what's created when you burn natural gas?
I beg your pardon?
Do you know what's created when you burn natural gas?
Carbon.
What else?
Beg your pardon?
Water vapor. Everybody knows that because if you have a gas furnace in your house or gas fireplace, either you have to vent it or sometimes you'll get the water vapor going on. Well, the typical Marcellus well that you're saying the water is going in and we're draining the water table, that Marcellus well that uses 5 million gallons to treat it, the water created when that natural gas is consumed is about 53 million gallons. It's a 10-to-1 return on your water. That water coming back out, because it's created as a vapor, is pure. So even if you're taking the water, like Carl said, it's not necessarily perfect, putting it down and creating better water, is it such a bad thing?
Now, coming back to pure, I have to have a question there. I just read an article from the New York Times stating the amount of radon coming out of the gas wells in Texas and Oklahoma was being reduced because the amount of pipeline that was between there and the Northeast. And the radiation adheres to the piping and the valves. But with it only coming 300 to 400 miles into New York City, they expect quadruple the amount of lung cancer cases from natural gas. The natural gas that you burn in your house.
Yeah, it sounds like you're getting your information in the wrong place.
No, I don't think so.
That's opinion.
Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, can you tell me how much bonding you're posting for these two wells, and if it's a blanket bond, can you tell me how many wells are covered under that blanket well bond? And also I have another question is, how much per mile are you bonding the roads for?
The plugging bonds are the price. We basically estimate the cost of plugging. I think it's
$30,000.
Is that what you have posted?
Yeah.
Per well?
Per well. And then we also have a Pennsylvania bond per well.
Right.
How much is that?
That's just a few thousand
Yeah,
dollars.
5,000.
5,000.
5,000 for each?
40. Yeah. So it's 40,000. One the EPA bond is 35. The Pennsylvania bond is 5. And then that for each well.
So you don't have a collateral bond to cover a bunch of wells in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, that's for,
That's for your production operation.
That's production.
Okay, so these are 5,000 apiece. And how about bonding on roads?
Well, in Pennsylvania, that's $12,000 per mile.
How many miles of road can you build with $12,000?
Yeah, well, that's,
Does that cover a mile of damage?
No, but the way bonding works, if anybody doesn't understand the road bonding parameters and road use agreements, the way they're meant to work, okay, is they're a monitored program where whoever uses the roads, whoever gets involved, essentially is required to replace or fix. If it's not done, that bond is started to be used, okay, and you are eliminated from using that road. So that's sort of the way Pennsylvania operates, that's the way New York operates, that's the way New York County and towns operate.
So if one of your trucks tip over and spill fluid on that road, like the tar degrades or the blacktop degrades, it's covered for $12,000 per mile?
No, what would a truck? What are you talking about? People that come in here, the truck in there, they're gonna be the guys that are responsible for bonding. This is a business that's running in this community that's been here a long time. I don't understand where you
So
people
then
get all
why
these
do they even
ideas.
have to bond the road then if it's not up to them?
How about all these loggers? They have to bond the road. They go to their township supervisors, they go to their communities, they get bonded. They run a 50 trucks up the road with logs on every day. That's normal.
That's how road use is handled. It's all it's bonding road use.
How many of your tax dollars fix the road that you drive?
I don't know.
You don't know, but you expect them to know.
Yes, that's what you're telling us about. They're telling
They're
us
not
about
telling
the
you about
bonding.
the road.
They came
They're
up
telling
here
you
and
that
they
they're
brought up
required to
the.
have the bond.
Miss,
See,
She's from
Think what else you
Colorado, by
want.
the way. She's not even from our area. So,
Wait, Pennsylvania.
Using state roads.
Yeah, wait.
Otter County, that's in Pennsylvania.
It's an easy explanation.
How many of your tax dollars are paid for the roads being used?
I don't know.
The states and the counties come up with a program.
What?
The states and the counties come up, the program's already been designed. We didn't redefine how roads are bonded. They told us what we have to do, and we basically meet those requirements. That's how most permitting and operations are done. You meet the requirements of the regulators. The Department of Transportation, the EPA, DEP, they're all the regulators. They tell you what you have to do if you want to do a business. If you follow those guidelines, you don't do the business. That's just the way the rules are.
Some of this is back to what we're doing up here.
I agree on it.
I'm with you.
Go for it.
Hey, can I ask one question first?
Okay.
What
First of
about the
all-
air? What about the air?
About the air?
Yes. You're gonna dump that stuff in the open pit.
No, it's all, there, nothing is open. Everything is either in a pipeline, in a tank, or down a well.
You have to let the pressure off, or is it coming?
There's no pressure.
I thought it took 1,000 pounds or something, pound of stuff down in there.
No, actually, what ends up happening is, that's what all you're doing is you're applying the pressure to get force to move it across an area.
Right.
That pressure is utilized to move it. So it's like flow is differential. If I put 100 pounds here, that differential causes it to move to the 0 pounds here. So the real pressure is that movement. That's what you cause. That's what the pressure does. It's the force. Pressure and area creates
If
force.
one of the wells mess up, where does that pressure come from?
Where if one of the wells, what?
Yeah, if you're putting the stuff down in the well, and you have to go back in there and fix it, where's all that stuff from?
It basically stays down. We're monitoring the pressure on the surface. If there's any increases or any erratic pressures, we shut down the operations. The operation stabilizes to 0. We go in, analyze what the problem is, and repair it. That's how it's
Where all that stuff is, it's in the middle. Down below, where you're still.
It's in a hydrostatic equilibrium. It's essentially 0. If you took a straw, okay, and blew into it, put water into it, okay, and then you essentially hold it, that fluid, if you hold your hand over the top, you pull the vacuum on it, the fluid stays
You're
in.
saying there's not no smells in it.
There shouldn't be. Not that we're aware of.
I'll go along with your word, your vision works, but see, I had the same problem in another sour gas well, and I'm still my wife, so that's why I'm asking about the air.
Yeah, no, the
But if there's
sour,
any smell, I'm coming back to you.
that's fine. The H2S that you're talking about in sour gas well is literally part of the gas smell coming from whatever
Now, this
formation
is
is
hydrogen
producing.
sulfide.
It's what?
It was hydrogen sulfide.
Yeah, H2S.
Yeah, I'm curious.
Yeah, yes, in low quantity. It's naturally occurring in a lot of formations.
Okay, what I want to know.
John, I've been in this since day one, and when we followed this thing along, gone through all the permits that they've had to get. We've watched what they've done up here as far as the DEP is concerned. And I've got to say this, and I will say it right up front. I think what's been done up here has been professionally done according to oil, the way they were told to do it. And as far as the surface operation, what I've been able to see has been handled in a professional manner and a safe manner. I don't have any idea about trucks or transportation or anything of that nature. However, I do have some concerns. My concern is the well construction of the 2 wells that we're talking about injecting in. Now, before these wells were be able to be used for injection, they had to be tested by the EPA. It's called a mechanical integrity test. And what it amounts to is they charge the 4.5, they put a plug in the bottom, and that isn't exactly what it's called, but to simplify things, they put a plug in the bottom, then they fill this 4.5, which is called the annulus, on the outside of 2 3/8, they fill that with water. Then they come up here to the top, and they put pressure on it. Pressure in this particular instance, I believe, was a maximum of 1,800 pounds. And I stand to be corrected on this, but I believe 1,800 pounds, and it has to, the pressure has to hold for 30 minutes, and it's allowed to drop maybe 12 pounds. If everything checks out, and it says that the integrity of that 4.5-inch piece is good, then that pressure holds. And then the fellow from EPA will look at that, in this case, Dave Rectenwald. He'll look at that and he'll say that well has passed the mechanical integrity test, and therefore it should be safe to inject. This happened. Now, prior to these tests being made, Bear Lake, these gentlemen, decided we better check these wells. They're approximately 30 years old, and make sure that the mechanical integrity is true. So they did. I don't know too much what happened well number 1. I do believe that the first test failed, and they went down and cut it off above the bottom cement. And there apparently was some type of defect in the pipe. So they did the proper thing. They went and bought new pipe, no longer 30-inch or 30 years old, and they went down and tied it in above the bottom cement. They have a contraption that they can tie that in. Then they retested it, and it passed. So they had Dave Rectenwald from EPA come on one day, and they went ahead and tested that well, and it passed, and he said as much. It passed, that well was good to go. Well number 4, that's the well that's closest to the state line road. When they tested that, they went down, this was like early in, I'm going to say early in October, I have it written down there, but in any case, they tested it and found that it would not hold the test. It leaked like 50 pounds over a 30-minute period. So they got an outfit in, and they pulled the 2 3/8 out, and they went down and they cut the pipe about 123 foot above the bottom cement. And they pulled that pipe up out, and sure enough, they found that about 650 foot from the surface, a hole. So at this point, they decided to do the same thing that they did with well number 1. They went and got all new pipe. And they put the pipe down in the hole, and unfortunately, when it came down in the hole, whatever this shoe is, I don't know just how it works, but it wouldn't seal. Then the thought being at that point was the pipe was not vertical with the hole, which makes me wonder, in as much as the cement is only roughly, well, less than 2 inches on each side, if this pipe coming up vertically is not centered in the hole, then how much cement is protecting on one side? Might have more cement on one side, less cement on the other. That probably is not a real problem. In any case, they pulled this pipe back up out because they couldn't get a connection. And they adapted the apparatus that connects it here, and they put it back down in there, and they did get a seal. So they ran the test again, and it failed. 50 pounds. So they pulled it back up, went down, and cut this off again. Now we're down to 71 foot above the bottom cement, with the same old pipe that had the hole in it. 71 foot, and I may be off a foot or two, from the top of the bottom cement, 2,800 foot, to the new patch, which is right here, is the same old pipe that failed. Oddly enough, there's no cement around that pipe at all. There's no cement around that pipe until we get up to 580 foot. 580 foot, we now have more than one layer of pipe. We have a roughly 12-inch pipe, and then we have cement on the outside of that. That goes down about 580 foot. In any case, we cut that off, went down in there again, and it wouldn't seal again. So they don't understand why that is. They finally decide the fact that they pulled that pipe in and out of there so many times, it's compressed the threads on some of the couplings. So we pull it up out, we'll get new pipe, and put it back down in. It then passes the integrity test. My question is this, my main question is, number one, that 71 foot of pipe, 30 years old, been exposed to the same elements as the pipe that had the hole.
No, it wasn't, but we'll talk about that in a minute.
Go ahead.
Actually, where was the hole?
The hole is
600 feet, right?
650 foot.
Right. What's up at 650 foot behind the pipe? Oxygen.
Pardon?
Oxygen. What causes corrosion?
Oh, I have no idea.
Oxygen.
I have
Okay,
no
when
idea.
and if you looked at that pipe, it was pulled out of the hole, any bad pipe, it's thrown up the hole. Why is that? That's because up there it's exposed to oxygen. Down below it's not exposed to oxygen, and the pipe was actually, I think we could have reused that pipe that was down below, and we didn't. We made the decision to use brand new pipe from a risk standpoint, but any time you have a leak in a well, and it's due to corrosion, it's going to be high up the hole, not low in the hole, because that's
That
where your
was
oxygen.
the 16th joint down. How long?
That's pretty high up the hole. It's a 4,400 foot well.
16 foot down, that's where. So
You're still in an oxygen, well not, we won't say oxygen rich, but you're in an oxygen environment that can cause corrosion.
And also in the report.
So my point is that pipe at the bottom of the hole looks like brand new pipe.
Maybe.
No, it does. Remember, we pulled it out.
No, you didn't pull out the 71 foot.
Yeah, but we pulled the point right above it.
You pulled it above.
That's
when
brand
you cut
new.
it off,
Right, and it looked
71
great.
foot. And it says in the report that the pipe was scaled.
The pipe
Oxygen
at the top
in
was
the water.
scaled.
Pardon?
The pipe at the top was
Oxygen in
scaled.
the water.
Not as much
If
as
you
there
leave
is
the pipe in
there.
the water long enough, it will rust out.
That pipe at the bottom of the well was always submerged in brine. Anything in brine down there don't rust. That's just what he's telling. I just pulled 4,000 feet of brine, producing tube out of my well, just like brand new, and it sat there 30 years with salt on it.
To build on Carl's comment and answer your question, the pipe we left in the hole was all good pipe. We're very comfortable with that. Like Carl said, the stuff we pulled out, we'd have no problem running in another well. The development of the programs and the space we allowed to remain with water is meant for a reason. That's the most cautious approach to pressure regulation. If you create a sump area, that's where anything that breaks down or anything goes will go there. Those are the areas we have monitored in our monitoring program. So we know and we have the ability that if any changes on the annular side of the tubing or the annular side of the 4.5, we know that, shut it down, stop, fix. And that's why we did that. A lot of people say, what we wanted to do is create a sealed environment in your drawing to the point where when Carl drew the drawing, you have this salt zone that comes across to you. I mean, that's a layer that basically nothing's coming up through. The other incidents of anything up here and development of fractures or anything else, you realize once you get above a certain level, roughly in this area, give or take 1,800, in some cases 2,400 feet, no fractures propagate vertically. The fractures in that area propagate laterally. And they propagate laterally on the formation because the stress forces in the rock are such that you can't get vertical fractures.
No, I'll tell you what, I asked, the last time I talked to Steve Flack, I saw him on vacation. I said it's been a year since you've done these mechanical things.
We're doing them again before we start.
And I asked him if they would do it again, and he said yes. And now you're confirming that.
Yeah.
That makes me feel better.
Yeah, we don't.
We have to do that every 2 years.
This whole operation was the condition of the wells. Because we only have basically one layer of protection outside of the entrance. That right there, that's our only protection.
Where, Tom, you have two. And let me explain why you have two. You have the one sealing the injection zone and the one protecting the water zone. So you literally, from a cement perspective, you have two protections. The likelihood of something going up and around this, up into this water, is nil. I mean, that's why the EPA, there's this program, and Carl has that hand up, the underground injection program, the development of underground disposal of fluids and waste, has been around for a long time. It's been a program that's worked on. The incident in Erie, like Carl said, it was the development of this program. You've noticed that a lot of the wells monitored by the EPA are very shallow. The incidence of something happening on deep underground injection, very small.
The thing is,
because it's a well-regulated
we're
program.
all in the same formation. We've got 174 wells in Columbus Township. 60 some of them basically belong to you guys. We're sure, and I think you've indicated in the past, if this works, you probably won't limit it to the two wells. It would not make good sense. If there's a market,
Well, if we decided to do it to other wells, Tom, we would be under the same regulations. We would have to perform the exact same.
I understand that, you'll have to go through new permits each time.
Right.
The thing that I'm worried about is like the two Tristan wells, which it says in your proposal, your original permit application, they would be used as monitoring wells. Now, they'll give or take a few foot, about 1,200 foot away. Could be a little more, could be a little less. If you can use those to monitor the pressure, that somehow or other in my mind says, if you're going to monitor pressure, something has got to create pressure. So it's either going to be gas pushed ahead of the solution you're putting in there, or else it's going to be the solution migrating from one well to the other. And if that migrates into the two Tristan wells from 1 to 1, how about the 8 or 9 wells just across the road from New York State? Will it go from well to well to well till it finds a well?
Do you know what, Tom, let me stop you right there. Do you know what kind of pressure it takes? First of all, I just described in my little dissertation there why these wells, they may have some small connection, but there's no major connection between the wells up there. Otherwise, you could have drilled one well and drained the whole area. That wasn't the case. But do you know how much pressure it takes if there was a connection? Because it isn't moving, this isn't a pipeline. This is a rock full of little sand grains, and it takes a tremendous amount of pressure. I know your concern, let me see if I get this right, is pushing water all the way over here to any well, could be any offset well, and pushing it all the way up here to 600 feet, where this hole may be. You know what the pressure is required over here to do that? Because we've calculated that. It's at least double what our permitted pressure is.
And I had
And
no
so
idea.
I'm
That's-
sharing that with you, that it's, even though we want it, another thing about New York, that's up dip. The rock in all areas, in most areas, I should say, particularly this area, dips as it was laid down. It's not a flat layer. It tends to get deeper in one direction. Up here, it gets deeper going south. The wells in New York, not only would it have to have tremendous pressure, that's probably 50, 60 feet uphill. Well, as the water goes into the depleted reservoir, it's going to tend to go, obviously, downhill. So, you know, that's, and the other thing is, the rate that would be required is over triple what our permitted rate is to get that incidence occurring over there. And that's not at 600 feet, actually. We calculated that all the way down to 1,000 feet.
And the thing you have to remember, Tom, one of the things that people get confused of is they think we're limited in the pressure we can put in. Nothing's going to go in these wells unless we put it in. So, in defining that pressure limitation, they defined it so we can't, like Carl said, they don't allow us to get outside of this area. It's defined that way. That's how they create that pressure. So what they look at is, okay, if we define it that way, what can happen? Once they stop us, it doesn't go anymore. It stays where it's at. It literally stays where it's at. So it's not like it's going to migrate to the wells in New York or migrate to some other wells. That's why they create the parameters that you operate under. They want to know that when they stop you, if there's some condition that makes them stop you, they get that condition before it causes any impact. That's the whole regulatory program.
And I can tell you this as well, the fellows who own those wells over in New York, own a lot of wells over in New York, and they're in the same position we are. And it would not surprise me, I mean, they deal with the EPA up there as well, Region 2, that at some point, I know there's probably at least 3 or 4 Class 2 disposal permits underway in Pennsylvania because there's a need for it. And the EPA and the DEP like the program. So I think that we've already spoken with these guys, and they know what we're doing, and they actually will probably be taking some of their brine, and they may try to convert at some point 1 or 2 of those wells because they're all low volume gas. They're the same position, depleted.
And I understand what you're saying. And I've gone to, my God, I don't know how many meetings, Harrisburg and all over the place. I've talked to all sorts of people in the industry, people that frack for a living, well service companies and so on and so forth. The first thing is they say, what? And then they say, for how much? How long? And then they say, we don't think it'll work. Now maybe you two fellas know something that...
Well, you know, one of the questions that comes up quite often, and I don't know where these fellows are going to talk, where they come from. You know, they may be from Texas, and they may, you know, be used to something quite a bit different. The question has always, you know, well, why aren't there more disposal wells in Pennsylvania? Well, as I explained earlier, there's 2 reasons. Number 1 is, up until very recently, there hasn't been a big need. Number 2, and everybody talks about the geology. The geology just won't accept it. Well, let me put that in perspective. In Texas, it's quite Texas, Oklahoma, Colorado, not just Texas, some of the western states, they've got much different geology. Louisiana, quite often it's not unusual at all to have a disposal well that's permitted for 20,000, 30,000 barrels per day. This is 1,000, to put that in perspective. So, and this was one of the best Medina Whirlpool fields developed in the state. There are some reservoirs in this state that are much better for water disposal than this. The problem is they're usually at risk, and they were converted to gas storage. Well, that's a big moneymaker, so a gas storage field operator is not going to, you know, pump that full of water.
Well, one of the main things that I wanted to establish, you asked it, you are going to retest these farms.
Yep.
And then they'll be tested every 2 years.
Well, actually, they're under, you know, under this.
They're under constant monitoring.
They're under
so
24/7 testing. You know, when you maintain that pressure with a gauge and an automatic shutdown, as soon as there's a failure in mechanical integrity, it shuts down. And so, you know, you have to do the official EPA witness recorded test every 24 months. But
the other thing you should be aware of, I mean, our initial operation in this facility, the initial planned operation is. I mean, it's not like we turn the switch on and then we leave and come back 2 months later after a bunch of fluid's gone in the ground. I mean, no person, it's basically operated. So all the pumping, all the injection, all the handling of fluids is with someone there. So not only are we mechanically checking everything that's going on and keeping track of what's going on, but we have a person that's watching to make sure nothing's happening. Nothing bad is happening.
Carl, can you go over again, and again, I'm Commissioner John Bortz, and the commissioners here in Warren County. Can you go over once again, you've talked about it several times, about if there is a failure, that you have, it's under 24/7 monitoring.
Right.
And if there is a mechanical failure, if for some reason, in spite of all your best efforts, there is a pressure lapse, whatever the term is, whatever it's
You want
termed.
to put that?
How does that work? The shutdown, is there any other additional reporting? How does it go back online after the shutdown? Can you review that?
Yeah, if there are gauges on this ambulance and that ambulance. When I say gauge, I mean a pressure gauge.
Sure.
Hooked up to a hydraulic valve.
Okay.
And you can set the pressure gauge with a high switch and a low switch.
Got it.
And if the pressure goes low, that means you've lost pressure. And if pressure goes high on this side, you set it several hundred PSI below your limited, your maximum allowable pressure.
Right.
That way, if you hit that, it shuts down. So if let's say a leak occurs in this pack, okay, we've got this protection, but we've got a packer leak.
How thick is that packing? Just
This down here is probably,
The rubber is 6 inches. I mean, it's
how many seals are there? There's probably 3 or 4
okay.
seals, and that's set under high pressure that seals out against the inside of this 4.5-inch pipe.
Between 2 and 3/8.
The more pressure it gets, the tighter it's sealed.
Right. So anyhow, if this somehow starts to leak, immediately you'll see a change in this pressure, and this valve shuts off the water that's going down. Okay, so now you know you have a problem.
Right.
And you don't know at that point whether it's out here, but it's in there, but it virtually happens instantaneously. So the next step is, you're not disposing into that water anymore, you call and get a rig to come out, pull this pipe out, you inspect the packer, then you come back in with a bridge plug, you set that right above these perforations, and you pressure this up. If that holds, you know that your leak wasn't in here. If it doesn't hold, you know you've got a leak down here, and you go find it and you repair it.
When you have,
The other thing to remember, when this shuts down, okay, nothing's coming this way. Nothing's coming up. When this shuts down, static equilibrium shutdown is this. It falls. It's like water, it falls, it settles down. So the reason it's set like that is the only thing that could possibly get anything up this way is continued pressure fluid, pressurized fluid. So when you shut down, they know that there's no instantaneous movement this way, so it stops. It's
So-
just set.
okay, now if there is a failure, is there any type of mandatory reporting that you're required to adhere to?
Oh, yeah.
So in other words, if this thing fails,
Yeah.
if this thing goes off, okay, the safety mechanisms are tripped, you have to pick up the phone and you're
We
required.
call it the EPA.
Yep.
And we tell them, what happened, when it happened, and they say, okay, what are you gonna do? We say, what I just told you, that's what we're gonna do. Okay, fine, that's what everyone else does. And if there's a situation like that, and then before it's just initiate injection, you have to do another EPA witness mechanical.
Okay, so after you have one of these things, then you have to go through this whole thing that Tom has been talking about. You have to have this thing, the EPA comes out again, and you have to get, in effect, recertified?
Right.
All right.
Joe?
One other question, John, I'll shut down. Are we going to have tanks on the upper end, or are we going to go what are we going to do there?
Put that back up.
Not at the well, up at the unloading pad.
No, there aren't going to be any tanks. Here,
We've changed that from what we were originally told.
Yeah,
we're not gonna have tanks there.
There won't be,
All right, now.
I gathered that from looking from the road over, it looked like there was going to be a connection. So as these trucks come in, They'll hook right up and feed the well.
Right, it goes through our line into the well. And there'll be a back pressure tank here and an overflow storage tank.
Those two little rib tanks, scare the hell out of me.
We were gonna paint them. Well, there's smileys on the
Well,
side.
you know, the thing you have to remember, Tom, with the tank is anything that's tanked in Pennsylvania, in particular here, is in secondary containment, where even if the whole tank bursts and leak, it's in a lined pit that's lined with plastic, and it's, you know, you come out, you see that,
10%.
and you pump it back in. Over 100%, 110% of the tank's on, so
I think we
that's.
have another question, excuse us, sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No.
Sam from Erie. My question to you is, I've read some studies where Duke studies on water wells around Denver, PA, where it showed that there was 90 times the level of methane on water wells 3,000 feet from a gas well. My question to you is, the flowback water, the one that you were talking about that you'll be injecting, that has benzene, thiamine, other potential causing agents, plus radium-226, which is another cancer causing agent at 300 tons per level that is higher than what the industry allows what to be discharged into water. Now, when you inject these, how do you make sure that within the perimeter of that well, that the water is actually safe? Because there's another study that showed that despite your statement, that there is actually a connection that occurs between the deep strata and the surface drawing. It does come up in certain areas. So how do you protect it?
Well, first off, we got to talk a little bit about the Duke study, because all the Duke data never came out. The stuff they did in New York State never came out.
Yes, he did. He actually went to Chesapeake CEO, and he also went to Duke, and he actually asked him, you know, can you dispute this? And he couldn't. So I think it's pretty valid.
Well, I can't dispute it, and he's never come
That's
to me.
fine.
So, anyway, but the Duke study, the gas that you're talking about in the upper layers of water, okay, is naturally occurring gas. Now, they can say it's biogenic, thermogenic.
Isotopic studies show that it was from
There's an
gas.
isotopic study done by Columbia University that goes far further than most of the isotope work done. And they can pinpoint exact formation. Nobody wants to spend the money to do that. So basically what they do is they talk about source rocks, Devonian, Upper Devonian, these other things. Let me finish my explanation so you understand where I'm going, because the likelihood of anything from down base getting up here is zero. Okay?
Well, there was another study.
Let me finish.
No, let me comment on that, because you're saying that nothing could come up, but
Right.
study after study is showing that it does come up. Even in Wyoming.
No, it doesn't.
Even in Wyoming.
No, let me explain the
Yeah,
Pavilion, Wyoming study.
Pavilion, I mean, that's.
Okay,
that's exactly
here,
right.
I'll give you the layman's drawing of the Pavilion, Wyoming study, because a lot of people, I got confused. I said, how could you have all this stuff communicating? Well, it was easy. Here's the surface. Here's the base of the study area. Okay, this is gonna really be simple. If you go into the EPA review, okay, essentially what you have is layers of rock in here, okay? Here's a water well, here's a gas well, here's a water well, here's a water well, here's a water well, here's a gas well, okay? These wells are fracked. Remember, water well, okay? The zone that was completed in Pavilion, Wyoming actually bears both the gas and the water. The likelihood of those two formations, that communicating, is very high. Even anyone in this room can figure out if you have a gas well, okay, in a water zone, the likelihood of the water and gas mixing is pretty common. A lot of areas throughout this country, and even parts of Pennsylvania, if you cross the border into New York, okay, a lot of the water wells are in what's called the Bradford Formation. You cross the border into Pennsylvania, what do we produce out of Bradford? Oil. Oil and water and gas are commonly occurring together. Okay, let me explain.
Wait, they actually had two sampling wells that checked the contamination from the surface and sampling lines checked for the contamination from the deep.
statement is not wrong. If you look at the cross-section, you dig out the cross-section, and you analyze what they show you, you will come to your own conclusions. And I will bet your conclusion's not far off of this. You have to look at what's presented. If I drill a gas well into a water zone, I can get both gas and water. That's what happens. In Dimmick, Pennsylvania, the upper zones down to about 600 feet, okay, contain both gas and water. What the companies drilling in the Dimmick area tried to do, New York's a little different, but Pennsylvania at the time when Cabot started their drilling didn't really have requirements that said, look, if you drill and you drill into natural gas, even at shallow formations, you can't drill any further. You have to case. Pennsylvania's rules, they wanted, essentially at the time what their guidelines were, is they wanted you to drill to a depth and set surface casing to protect these water zones. What they didn't realize in drilling in the Dimmick area is there was also some shallow shales that contained gas. So what happened when they drilled down to set this casing point, they drilled to water and gas. Once those two started to commingle, and that gas basically has the same isotope analysis as the gas down here, okay? And it's been, look, there are a lot of studies out there, but step back and start to think like somebody that understands what's going on. When you have, when you have things going down, look, it's not an insult. What happens is people try to change.
We're talking about the welfare of this community.
Let me explain.
Water and air. And are you two going to your family being
Please.
Let me tell you something.
Are you going to leave?
Let me tell you something.
Oh, sit down.
Place to go in Pennsylvania, you buy this oil. I got it on my property. Anything you do in the first 600 feet in Pennsylvania, you can get gas, you can get water, and you can get oil. But you go below 600 feet, you're going to get salt. Because there's 3 layers of salt down to the 4,200 feet where the Medina Formation is. And I don't know why you people can't get that through your head.
Most of the
Maybe you won't be making any money like somebody else.
Most of the contamination of this groundwater, okay, down to the 600-foot level, comes from this direction. All the regulatory programs, all the precautions, everything that's taken out there, and everything we have to abide by, protect to try to stop this from happening and prevent any activity within this zone. That's why the programs were developed.
How would you explain the fact that the wells outside of 2,000 feet from the gas well had 1/19th of the gas level as was within? You don't drill the same way, so how do you explain that one side of the well had more gas in the water than when it was outside of that?
Because it was contacted during the drilling phase of the gas well, not the water well. That's what I'm saying. When they drilled these gas wells to set surface casing, the requirement in New York is you have to set the surface pipe before you come in contact with any natural gas bearing zones. Pennsylvania didn't have that requirement at the time. What happened was they proceeded to drill and actually encountered small amounts of naturally occurring methane in the shallower zones. Once they encountered that, it's already moved. It charges the other aquifers. There's only a few feet in here. It charges itself. You can't prevent that. People in Pennsylvania now, there have been water wells drilled, and I know of a few in New York, where they drilled water wells and encountered natural gas.
I got a neighbor that in 1930, they drilled the water well there. They could light the damn faucet when the water was coming out. Natural gas. That's the surface gas.
This isn't about that. I mean, the program...
This has nothing to do with that.
The program developed here is basically a control program to allow the disposal of fluid at...
Again, I'm going to go back to the question. How do we monitor around your intervention well to see if there is contamination from your, not the site of the injection, but in the perimeter of the well? How would you monitor
If we can prevent anything from moving in there by maintaining constant pressures, then they know nothing's going out. That's how, I mean, that's how it's designed.
Okay, so nothing distal to
Right.
the wellhead, but it'll just be at the site.
If there's any fluid contacting any zones in here, it's within the case structure. Because everything is designed so that nothing pushes away from it. That's how the program limitations on pressure, that's how the program limitations on operating parameters are designed.
Sorry for being ignorant, but just conceptually, when you pressurize something and put $1,000 in there, then it will not dissipate into the surrounding.
But remember, we're monitoring that the entire time under a pressure that's designed only to allow it to go to a certain area. Oh, I messed up our board and I got all kind of drawing on it. But
It goes back to the original reservoir pressure that originally existed. When the wells were drilled, they had natural gas in them. Right? And what this method is, what this program is refilling that void space that's evacuated with water just back to that pressure, not anything beyond that.
So you're saying that the well that had been drilled is absolutely void of any item, that is,
Right.
it's like a cavern.
Well, no, it's not like a cavern, it's a void space. If you want to think of it as a cavern, it's, yeah, essentially think of it as an empty space. The water is put back in, and, you know, I guess I come back to the point, if the gas was there for hundreds of millions of years and didn't leak out, and the water just goes back to that same pressure that that gas was in,
It's not going to leak
it
out.
wouldn't leak out. You got the impermeable shales above.
I guess from back in early 70s, 80s, back when I was a kid, they talked about fracking, and they said at the time that fracks could go up to a mile. What's the misconception there? That's what I was told. Wow.
I've never heard that in my life. In my career.
I started my career with a stimulation company. And I mean, we've worked on wells that aren't any further than, shallow wells that aren't any further than 300 feet apart and have it connected between wells.
I can tell you that most, there have been studies done, many studies all around the country, all around the world, and just in the last few years where they run a lot of what's called microseismic on the surface, and they can actually map the fracture at depth. And a good fracture might reach, what, 300, 400 feet?
Yeah, man, you know, they've
For
had
the ones that
some-
are actually mapped. No, that's fine. Yes?
I have a question. You're basically saying that there's no chance of any of the stuff that you got down coming back up. But then you caution everybody to have their water tested. So why should they have their water tested if there's no chance?
No,
It's already polluted.
The reason I suggested having water tested, because when we tested the water up there, we found that quite a bit of it was already polluted. I'm just offering that as a friendly suggestion. I mean, you can or cannot. I'm just saying that, you know,
Well,
most people are under the impression they have a residential water well, it's just pristine spring
but
water.
you were talking about bacteria.
Yeah, right.
Not
That's very different.
not about that.
E. coli, way worse than
You're going to be accepting flow back water from Marcellus well. And there's a lot of nasty stuff in there. And do you think that the baseline DEP water testing is adequate to protect people against the stuff you're going to be injecting?
Well, let me ask you this. If the baseline material constituents that they have you test for are things that make up the vast majority of production water, right? I mean, whether it's chlorides, I'm talking volume-wise.
Yeah.
Okay, so therefore, how would you have some strange constituent that is measured in micrograms per liter show up in your water without having these other constituents in there that make up the vast majority?
Well, some of them are, like BTEX chemicals, for example, very toxic, glutaraldehyde, ethylene glycol, which aren't part of the baseline testing and would require a higher tier of testing in order to have that done.
The analysis we have doesn't have any, I mean, the fluids
I
we're
know that.
looking at don't,
It
no,
doesn't
we've
have that
tested for
stuff in
that.
it.
We've tested for that. We've done the analysis for that, for the fluids coming in, and the resultant analysis shows none of those.
My point, wait,
Where do they go?
I don't think they're used.
No, they are used. They're part of, you guys are stimulation people.
Now
Now
here's my question for you. If you're, we say, I don't know, pick one of the ethylene glycol. Okay, and let's say that ethylene glycol makes up, I don't know, 0.1% of a fractal. Say, okay, well, there's some in this water that's coming back. Well, you're going to have to test for ethylene glycol if the majority of it is salt. If all of a sudden you have this huge volume of salt show up, you can assume that something else is there. That's why you're not required to test for 50 different constituents. Mike, I guess what I'm saying is, how would the ethylene glycol get there if there's no salt there?
Well, because it goes, you guys use it for the stimulation.
No, I'm talking
No,
about
we're talking
in a
about
residential
testing.
What
water
about,
well.
well, okay, what about radioactive stuff?
Well, same thing. There's radioactivity all throughout the earth, right? Don't you have to have a
It's not
radioactivity?
normally in drinking water.
Well, that's great. It's not in the drinking water. So my point is, if you test what's the first thing you're going to notice? If there's a pollution incident in a residential water well, is the first thing you're going to notice radiation or salt?
Well, salt, but
See what the testing program is designed around to do is typically what you want to test for are those things that come in higher concentrations, higher amounts, because they will show up first. And you want to catch the leading indicator, not the lagging indicator.
well,
So what they want.
some of those things, when people have their water tested like that, the EPA says, well, barium is naturally occurring. So,
It is.
And so it is naturally occurring. So that's one of the things with fluoride is naturally occurring.
But not at 300,000 parts per million.
Well, I know.
No, that's my
But the
point.
radioactive stuff, I mean, just,
It's naturally occurring too.
yeah, but it's not normally in water.
Well, that's right. But I guess what are you asking? You're saying that when we do residential water tests, we should test for a whole plethora of...
I think around wells you should. Absolutely, because, for example, benzene is probably the most carcinogenic thing that's in there.
But what's the most common source of benzene that you know of?
Welding.
What
Well,
else? Give me one more common.
I mean, it could be.
How many people live at a gas station?
Yeah.
Okay, so the
All the gas
see
stations does.
what
See how
the
you're running
program
it.
is, you gotta remember, the program is designed around our project, okay? If we just tested for benzene, and you happen to dump a gallon of gasoline out in your yard filling up the lawnmower and it was close to your water well, all of a sudden you got benzene, okay? No, nothing to do with us, but we only tested for benzene. Now we do that same test and we look for chloride, there's no chlorides. So all of a sudden we know, well, wait a minute, probably not coming out. The stuff we're putting down has 290,000 parts per million chlorides. So what you're trying to do, what the regulatory programs try to do, is they define guidelines to manage the operations, okay, control the operations, and prevent environmental, happenstance. And to do that, they monitor the operations and they provide testing programs.
I know.
Those,
But the thing is, if we don't baseline test your own water for that, they can come back and say, well, this was already in there. And that's the whole thing. That's, you have this basic tier 1 level water testing. We should be testing
so what you're saying is before we get started, test for this stuff. What's going to happen?
I mean, I'm talking about drinking water. I'm talking about you're asking people to get their water tested on a regular basis.
I just had the EPA priority pollutants test done on my injection. It's $4,800.
expensive.
So it's a, you know, and it's 11 pages long.
Not that long.
Well, mine is. I don't know, maybe they don't.
Well, I'm just saying, if I were a property somewhere that had a water well that could be impacted by this, I would want to make sure that my water is as pure as possible to be because of the liability aspect. When people pump stuff down the ground, it may or may not find its way back up into somebody's water. That you need to have a baseline so that you know that it wasn't there before.
Why don't you do your own
Well,
baseline?
yeah,
Why should we?
Try to worry about contamination before they came to town. Would you have ever thought to test your water before they came to town? John, I'm still a proctor. I've known of you 3 years. The two of us have been responsible in the last 4 weeks for hauling in Potter County almost just shy of 2 million gallons of flowback production going through it. Where we took it, the facility we took it to, we went through radiation detectors every single load. Not one of those loads set off the radiation detector.
Don't win.
What is your setting?
Steve, do you know?
You guys take, like,
I'm
sorry? You guys take it to Warren?
No, sir, we do not.
Franklin?
Nothing can go to.
No, nothing
can go to Franklin.
Because it was Marcellus, it is going to Key County landfill.
Oh, okay. Why do we keep on the landfill? And they dump it out top of the hill and the water drains down into the Wilcox and into the Ferry River.
Oh, is that
Oh,
how?
that's how I know that.
There's a brand new plant up there. There's a brand new plant up there with zero.
What do they do with
Zero.
What do you do with
Zero
cutting?
water goes out of that plant. What are
We
you
haul,
talking
they haul the production water and flow back, is what I did not say.
What do they do with the stuff that they?
Wait, we're getting off track here. We're talking about
You
this
were
thing.
worried about radiation, not.
We'll work our way back from Paul. How about
I
that?
want to talk about the economic impact of what's going on here in Columbus Township and in Bear Lake area. Right now, for the last 2 years, landowners in my area, we've been together, we've been trying to get our properties leased for Utica drilling. This is over 2 years we've been involved with. We have a millionaire out of the East Coast that's been willing to stay with us all these years and try to sell these leases to other places. Right now, 9 landowners in my unit, they do a unit for a Utica well, we're talking 640 acres. We got about 564 acres. My 7 neighbors. They have cost us, by all this rigmarole, $1,785,000 that these landowners, these 7 landowners in this area could have got. And as of today, I talked to that millionaire today. He says, I can't get the companies interested because there's too much negativity up there. It's about time we start. Everything that's ever been done in this country, somebody wants to stop it. It seems to me that there's been a lot of regulations. This is one of the most regulated states there is. When I started to open my regulated shooting grounds in Columbus Township, oh my God, it could be the end of the world. The end of the most unsafe days on the face of the earth. Going out there and hunting and killing pheasants. Went through a whole month of meetings and hearings and zoning meetings. I prevailed. But I'm going to tell you, the landowners in Columbus Township are not going to tolerate this kind of activity because we need these guys so they got a place to dispose of their water when they come up here and frack.
I just know that some people know about money, other people just buy the
Nobody's going to tell me I can do all my
We're getting questions.
You just said that.
Never go here, we'll cross, so. No, you already had 3.
This is important.
No, you had too many. Go ahead.
Hi. I do have a question for you. How are these trucks, when they're bringing the waste in, going to be identified? Residual waste, hazardous waste?
Residual waste.
Residual waste.
Residual waste.
Okay, so why do you not have a transfer facility for residual waste permit?
Because we're not storing anything.
Okay.
We're not putting anything outside of the well site.
But you're disposing of it, and that's part of a facility.
Being pumped directly from the truck down the well.
It's being pumped from the truck to the well.
So that's
We have a site that was going, that's where, somebody mentioned earlier, I think Tom mentioned earlier, we talked about a facility here. The discussion of putting something here or any other place that goes to multiple wells would require all of the laws and all the regulations now allow operations at well sites. Okay? But if you move it off the well site, whether it's here or down in Route 6 or whatever, it becomes a residual waste facility in the permitting process.
So if you were to move it to Route 6, you would have to have a residual waste facility?
Yeah, probably.
Okay, so why didn't you guys do that to begin with? Why up here
That's
first?
a huge investment. Before we make that investment, we need to see how much water the well is taking.
Okay, and I do have one more question.
Okay.
As far as the pipeline goes, the black pipe that's up there is plastic, rubber, what is that? That was on the spools?
They're the two pipes. One is a Kevlar braided poly pipe and the other is black HDPE
And
plastic.
so the first one you talked about was the white?
The outside is the black, the inside is the blue. I think it's a bluish color.
Okay, we were told it was to be metal by the DEP.
I don't think you want metal pipe with salt.
You don't want metal pipe with
That's
salt water.
what, but that's what Todd Carlson told me. So apparently they're misinformed.
Well, when it comes to steel pipe, you got connections involved. When it comes to plastic pipe, it's all one piece.
Okay, well, thank you for your input. I was asking.
No,
That's what Todd Carlson told me on the phone. I'm Jennifer Williams, by the way.
Okay.
Oh,
He told me that it was to be metal pipe inside the black pipe. So there's a lot of misinformation, obviously. There's a lot of miscommunication.
I don't think so.
Todd is actually not part of the group that prepares that permit. He's in the waste side. This is permitted by the oil and gas side.
Right, I understand that, but what I'm saying is there's so much misinformation, you can see why everyone's so confused and upset.
Right. The easiest place to get it is most of this information, matter of fact, all of it is either available through the DEP or available through the EPA in its entirety. So, I mean, all of that is laid out in there. The specs of everything is out there. I mean, there could have been some confusion. Could have been based on something somebody thought without even looking at it, because I'm not even sure if he saw the plan.
I'm not sure either. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Put their name on the
In the state of Pennsylvania, in Central Park, where the Marcellus actually being raised, they have set up recycling plants for the waste of rock waste. Could you please compare and contrast that process they're using versus the injection process that you're proposing?
Well, two things I'll mention. First of all, this is obviously much less expensive than those recycling processing plants. A, B, they can only recycle until they're done with the fracturing process in a given area. Then at some point it converts over to production fluid, and if a company isn't continually using that water to fracture the next well, the next well, the next well, then it then becomes production water and it has to be disposed of. We're actually having some discussions, and thirdly, I would mention even with the recycling plants, there's still a waste stream that comes out of that.
The amount of water used
Right. And we've actually been talking to, for instance, there's companies that are producing some of their wells, and they're hauling, a couple thousand barrels a day over Ohio right now. One of these recycling plants, they're looking for a place to get rid of 300 or 400 or 500 barrels a day, because that's what's left over of their stream that's highly concentrated brine. And we've been in discussions with them and about perhaps taking that up here. So that's there's a need for that, and that's, Pennsylvania has been at the forefront of this recycling, but it only works in the fracturing process, and eventually, when in a given area they're done with the hydraulic fracturing, it's production water, and it has to be disposed of.
Right, there will have to be some disposal.
Right.
Reduced.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Yeah, and that's, and I'm all for that. I mean, I think that's a great idea. I think there's actually, the company we're talking to I think has a great plan. There's energy required to recycle. You have to burn gas. And when gas prices are real low, okay, that's a little bit more economic. It's still, $8, $9 a barrel compared to
Your
maybe
clients are
$3.
going to be looking at your economical route.
Right, but what these guys are doing is locating some of these plants on landfills. They're using landfill gas, which is lower quality. You can't use it really for residential purposes, but for this they can. So I think that's a real win-win. Yes, you had your hand up for about half an hour.
Hello, my name is Bob Sens. I'm the pastor of the Church of Bear Lake over here, right around the corner. And I'm not going to be contentious. I just want to say thank you very much for coming tonight and presenting in front of us. To me, that takes a lot of guts to do that and stand in front of us. So thank you for that. My questions are pretty straightforward. Number one, you said it's a daylight operation Monday through Saturday, correct? Number two, you said you will not be coming through Bear Lake Borough. Could you explain which route you will be taking?
As I understand it, talking to some of the trucking companies that we're talking to now, they're going to come up through New York on some roads that are adequate to handle some level of truck traffic. They still require bonding. We're going to try to stay off Bear Lake roads and Columbus Township roads until we get to a point where perhaps we can utilize State Route 6.
Right. And then third is maybe some of you are trucking company here, or some of you?
I am a driver, yes.
Okay, well, you're a driver, okay.
Yep.
None of the fluid is placardable, is that correct?
It is non-hazmat, you do not have to have.
Yeah,
the
that's all I want to know if it's
license.
placardable or not.
No, non-hazmat.
It should be, but.
No.
I appreciate, I live here, I've got 4 kids, right up the road. I appreciate everyone's passion for this. And I'm thankful for everyone being passionate about it. But the thing we have to remember is when these guys leave, we still community. And we cannot go out of here being loud, obnoxious, and angry, and contentious with everyone. We're going to have to come to terms with this. Just like this is the property they bought, we have to respect what they and the state do. We can fight it legally and through legal terms, but we still have to come to the end result that whatever the law says, that's what we're going to do. So, I appreciate everyone's passion. Completely appreciate it. But these guys cannot change the way that fracturing takes place. These guys cannot change the way that some people recycle water and some don't. I wish it wasn't in my backyard. But I'm also the same guy who complains when I have high gas prices. I love every one of you here, I really do. Let's not let this tear our community apart. I do appreciate you coming. Like I said, I hope everything works out the way you guys are planning, but I know sometimes the best laid plans of men don't always anticipate everything. So I don't know what the future brings, but thank you for coming, thank you for answering my questions.
I've been operating a disposal well in New York State. It's not a commercial well, it's a private well. We've been hauling our own brine there since 1985. And we've done some siting surveys, we've done all kinds of analysis. We do water well testing more than I ever want to believe. And this well is essentially less than 1,000 foot deep. And it's in what we call terms the salt. Okay? And it's been operating there for that, and there's been absolutely no impact. None. There's been no spills, there's been no problems. My understanding and background here is that the program's been around for a long time. I can tell you that the monitoring, the requirements, the stuff that the EPA on top of it. It's not something that's taken lightly. It's not taken lightly by the regulators. It's not taken lightly by the operators. I mean, Carl said it, I'll say it again. We believe we're part of the community when we're here. I mean, we came here as oil and gas operators. We came to this plan to try to stay here as oil and gas operators. And it's an opportunity to help others as well, and we're looking at that.
Thank you for your time.
You want to yell at me one more time, guys?
My question is, will you have any computer monitoring equipment at the transfer site?
No, it'll come here all tested.
It'll come here all tested?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes, it will. It can't exceed any of the limitations.
When you go to your dentist office, you better get nuclear testing.
Go ahead, back there.
I didn't hear that, sir.
Are you familiar with the medical order?
Medical gag order?
Yes, going on in Pennsylvania.
No.
Apparently it states that you guys or any sort of medical company needs to tell a doctor that if a person comes in sick, they don't have to tell them what's wrong with them. And I just wanted to know if you guys, even if it's not something that's really going on or stays in effect, do you guys agree with that? Would you guys support that a doctor should not be able to tell someone who got sick what's wrong with them if it came because of an injectable coming in?
No. I mean, if somebody ends up sick and there's an issue, I'm all for whatever treatment they need to get. I mean, there's no... What?
I go to my doctor and he don't tell me what the hell is wrong with me, I get a different doctor.
Corbett signed it, read it. That's their saying right there.
Is everybody piles out the court? Anything else? Go ahead.
I do have some handouts, by the way, if anybody's...
He's asking a question. You can read that.
Go ahead.
We have no clue how to handle it. You say it's fresh water, you say it's chemical, fresh water, you say it's groundwater. What is it? How do we handle it if we have a spill? We've been told that there's a spill, evacuate this stuff. To evacuate the town. There's a list of chemicals, 800,000, I've been checking in our hazmat book, that tells us what to do if these chemicals are in there. Okay? And what are we supposed to do?
It's easy to answer. I think as Carl explained, everything that's coming here is going to be analyzed and tested. So we'll have what's in it. Okay? What's in it will also be covered. So everybody can have that information, as well as the hazmat teams, as well as the emergency response team. And it's all part of our emergency response plan management program. So everybody's going to be aware of what's going on. It would be just like, from the handling perspective, since you're going to know what's in it, okay, from the testing program, nothing comes here untested.
Who tested it?
Huh?
Who tested it?
Independent lab.
Independent lab.
You get a third-party independent lab.
They're all, they have certified laboratories throughout the state. It's fine.
No, you might go back, they're changed.
So what happens is, since it's known, then you can essentially use your guidelines for that. And we'd be part of defining that guideline. If there's anything like necessary, because of something, we'd assist in finding whatever resources are necessary. I mean, that's
Didn't you say, and I can't even hear myself, didn't you say that each fire department in the area, which is very you would clean it up, correct? Okay, so if you took that and put in there how you would clean it up, then we would take it, and that's how we would clean it. Problem solved.
How do we get that?
There's how you get to
Once we define, I mean, right now, as you guys know, Carl explained, we're still finalizing the process for all the permits. Once all the permitting's completed, once all the testing's done, then the final documents get prepared, they're available for everyone.
I have a document that I can give you your address. I'll mail it to you, probably early next week. You can give me the address of somebody in front of us. It's done. We just need to shoot it over.
I'm sitting right in front of you, really.
I'm not on the site, maybe you said this before and I just didn't catch it. What is the pit?
That is a lined pit with plastic and gravel. It's designed, if there ever were a spill of a truck up here, there's a cement pad that tilts down into that pit. So,
Underneath that plastic.
Yep.
Okay.
yeah. And if there's ever, if the guy is unhooking from the pipeline with his truck and
Valve
typically there's
trucking.
Is that where